Hey everyone, I'm your host Adrian. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching. Well, everyone, as we're getting into it, let's just go ahead and hop in. I know there's going to be some folks joining, so I'll always repeat kind of what some of these housekeeping items are. So if you're new, welcome into Rupa. And welcome to today's Rupa Live class presented by Rupa University, the best way to order specialty lab work and learn about specialty lab work from industry experts. My name is Adrian Martinez, and I will be your host for this afternoon. Today, we have a very special guest in Ryan Smith with TruDiagnostic here to show us how to use TruAgePACE in your anti-aging practice. Before jumping in, a couple of quick housekeeping items. Everyone joining will be muted by default, but don't fret. If you do have any questions, please use that Q&A button down in your menu bar, and we'll host a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Immediately following the Q&A, yours truly will show you exactly how to order this test directly on Rupa Health. And if you have to jump early, no worries. We are recording this session, as we always do, and you'll be able to find it on rupauniversity.com within the coming days, as well as we'll go ahead and send you an email recording once we have that all edited for you. And finally, if you are a fan of this type of content, be sure to check out rupauniversity.com to get access to all the previous sessions that we have done, including those with TruDiagnostic. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. I'd like to introduce Ryan Smith. Ryan attended Transylvania University and graduated with a degree in biochemistry. After finishing all the educational curriculum and passing USMLE Step 1, he decided to leave and open up a compounding pharmacy. That pharmacy, Tailor-Made Compounding, became the fourth fastest growing company in healthcare in the US. Since then, Ryan founded TruDiagnostic, a company focusing on methylation array-based diagnostics for life extension and preventative healthcare. TruDiagnostic is a CLIA certified lab and health data company focused on serving integrative and functional medicine providers in the US. Since TruDiagnostic's inception, they have created one of the largest private epigenetic health databases in the world with over 15,000 patients tested, and continues to lead the space in epigenetic methylation interpretation and diagnostic prediction. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ryan. I will go ahead and let you take it from here.
Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction, Adrian. And it's great to be here with the Rupa team and some of you amazing providers. I'm going to be talking today about some of our testing, particularly this TruAgePACE testing that we're doing, and particularly how to incorporate it into your practice. But in order to do that, I want to do a little bit of review of sort of what our diagnostic method is and how it compares to others out there in the space. And so a little bit about us, I think that Adrian gave a great introduction, but we're still a relatively young company, been around 2.5 years now. And we, at this point, have the largest epigenetic database in the world. We're really trying to lead epigenetics as a biomarker, and we'll go into sort of what that is and what that means and how we're trying to push that forward. But we work with a lot of great universities and are really, I would say, leading the way in age-based analysis. And so to introduce the topic of epigenetics, I always like to go to this study, the famous agouti mouse experiment, which was really done in right around 2007. So it's still relatively recent. And here was a really interesting study. I think when people heard about this whole human genome, whenever the human genome was being sequenced, they thought it would solve a lot of our health-related problems. We'd have all of the answers to what makes us us and what makes the diseases that we face so prevalent. But this was one of the studies that really, would start to say, flip that assumption on its head. And what happened here was generally that two genetically identical mice had basically different nutritional patterns. And so you can see the same mice genetically had very different phenotypes as an outcome. So the genetics were all the same, but whenever their mothers were fed with a methylation supplementation cofactor like choline, folic acid, and vitamin B12, they ended up very normal. But when they weren't fed with this, and instead were fed with bisphenol A, they started to have very different phenotypes. And so one obviously was healthy, skinny, normal pigmentation, where the other one ended up having yellow fur, developed significant obesity and diabetes throughout their adulthood. And this is all to the genetic regulation of these individual mice. And so the idea here being that genetics isn't everything, and that particularly our diet and nutrition can actually change these gene expression profiles, which can lead to different types of disease risk. And this is really when epigenetics started to, I would say, be pushed into the mainstream and really be studied as an independent topic, not necessarily what your genes are, but how those genes are actually expressed. And so to go into that a little bit more, this is a way that we like to explain it to patients. So, we always like this sort of visual example of this on or off switch, because that's really what epigenetics is doing. Every single cell in your body has the exact same DNA. So your heart, your liver, your skin, all of them have the same DNA if we were to extract it. But what DNA is turned on and turned off in each cell is vastly different. And that's how these cells actually get their function, right? So that's how your heart knows to behave like a heart cell, and your liver cells know how to behave like liver cells. It's by what genes are up and down regulated. And we're really measuring those on or off switches. And so in particular, the on switch for most of these things is something called histone modification. And really, these are the histones are those proteins that really wrap your DNA and store it really conveniently. But whenever we acetylate it, we attach a charge molecule to these proteins, and they sort of like oppositely charged magnets or same charge magnets seem to oppose each other. They seem to push apart. And when they push apart, we actually can have our genetic transcription machinery get close to that gene and then start to express it, start to create mRNA from that particular DNA segment. What we're measuring mainly here at TruDiagnostic, and what the field of epigenetics really has the most data on at the moment, is DNA methylation. And this is sort of that off switch to epigenetics. So whenever we attach a methyl group, we actually prevent that transcription machinery from binding to the DNA. And then we make generally less of that mRNA that would lead to the peptides and proteins that give the cell its phenotype. And so really what we're measuring is DNA methylation. And DNA methylation is a very complex process. And as we mentioned already, it is cell specific, but particularly where these genes attach to are called CPG islands. So you might hear that term very, very frequently, but there are over 29 million of these locations in the entire genome. So we can turn that off switch on in a lot of places. But this is actually what we're measuring when we do a test. Whenever we get a sample, what we're doing is we're extracting that DNA from those cells, and then we're quantifying what is the percentage of methylation at each of these locations. We measure approximately 900,000 per every test that we do. And so that's only still a fragment of the total whole methylome, as we call it, that can be analyzed. But already this is a really exciting field. And it's an exciting field for a lot of reasons, but mainly because it's providing us a really exciting and new biomarker. And so I always like to use this example of the biomarkers of sepsis and how they've evolved over the years. But the definition of these biomarkers have been indicators of biological processes or pathogenic processes, or predicting pharmacological response or therapeutic intervention measurements. And so this really encompasses a large array of diagnostics, but in the case of these, you always tend to improve. So, in 400 BC, Hippocrates really had defined sepsis as when the inner body is very hot and the outer body is very cold. But as that has sort of evolved, we've had a lot of other different ways to do that. In 1842, it was looking at lactate within the body. In 1982, it was CRP, and now we've got things like IL-6 and different omic related things. And so this definition or these biomarkers continue to evolve. And as they do, we have much more resolution. So, at first we were measuring total cholesterol. Now we have particle sizes for cholesterol. And so these are always evolving. And methylation is really taking this to the next level, where we can have really, really sensitive biomarkers that are both predictive, diagnostic, and can relate to intervention. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. If there's one big takeaway from me today, it is to pay attention to methylation, because over the next 20 years, it's anticipated to even overtake blood testing as a therapeutic diagnostic. And so that's really what we're trying to do is we already have all these methylation locations in our DNA, but we're really trying to create the Rosetta Stone of it. We're trying to basically learn how to interpret this language of methylation and epigenetic signaling to give us insights into health. And we're doing that via artificial intelligence and machine learning with really, really big data sets. I'm sure you've all seen ChatGPT. We've had massive growth in these AI protocols and platforms over the last few years. And what that's allowed us to do is to take very large data sets, things like massive 29 million CPG related methylation information, and really associate it to predict things that we want to predict. And the predictions that we can do with this now are all over the field of medicine. And this is why it is going to be so prevalent in the future. I always like to reference this quote from an MD PhD in Silicon Valley, who says that 5 to 10 years from now, the health data system that doesn't use methylation data to improve the medical delivery is going to be deemed archaic. And so again, this is something you should definitely be paying attention to, something you should be learning, because it will change the way that you deliver healthcare. And so these are a couple examples, even just over the past few months, of ways that DNA methylation has been able to predict outcomes or to be used as biomarkers. On the top, we see that it can predict things like osteoarthritis. We see that it can predict how you're going to respond to prostate cancer. And even at the bottom, we see that they can now create methylation risk scores, which are much better than the polygenic risk scores. And actually, we're able to predict, I would say, disease outcomes of 129 diseases with just only 800 samples. For context, we've got over 20,000 samples in our database now, and are creating predictions of multiple different types of disease. And with one test, just one small drop of blood that you would get on our platform, we think we're going to be able to report out a lot about your functional health. Already, we can predict your death when you might die. We can predict how much you've smoked across an entire lifetime. We can predict even how much pollution you've been exposed to, all through these records. And so we're beginning to improve that analysis, and the applications are endless. But I want to today talk about the application that is what I would consider definitively the biggest for health of everyone in society. And so to do this, I always like to sort of show these slides and say, can you guess what is the number one risk factor for each of these conditions? They're very different conditions. We're talking about things like cognitive decline versus cancer versus autoimmune disease versus diabetes. And they all have the same exact risk factor. And beyond that, I always like to, I would say, show another slide. These are the top 3 causes of death in 2020. And you, on the left, sort of the y-axis, have the relative risk of death for each of these different conditions that are the top causes of death. And then at the bottom, you have, I would say, which of those risk factors they are. For instance, things like smoking and obesity are recognized here. And so can you guess what that big relative risk is? The one that's reaching 30 or 40% in each of these different causes. And so I always like to use this as a thought experiment, because most people wouldn't necessarily say the answer correctly, which is definitively aging. Age is the number one biological risk factor for all of these different conditions. And I think that as you're talking to patients, these are always good graphics to show, because it shows the importance of quantifying this aging process. And it also gives them a relative reference of things that they already know are bad. Things like smoking or obesity, everyone knows how unhealthy that can be for you. However, this dwarfs smoking and obesity in terms of relative risk. And so, and it's not even close. And so showing them this comparison can really put into perspective how important aging is to our risk of all disease outcomes. But beyond that, we also know that it plays a massive impact on our healthcare system. There's a reason that people in their 30s and 40s don't come up down with the same disease at the same rates as those in their 60s and 70s. And so if we were able to really decrease this aging process for everyone, we would be able to save the US over $256.7 billion a year if we just increased life expectancy by 1 year, and 8.8 trillion for over 10 years of life expectancy. And so this is a major problem, and it's one that we want to solve, right? We all want to solve the number one biggest risk factor for every disease and death. And so whenever we're talking about aging, we also have a lot of different concepts of it. And so some people will think, just talking about the chronological age of a person. But what we're talking about here today is biological age. So how old is your body, and how is your body aging? And this is a very different concept. And the reason we want to measure this is because chronological age is really not indicative of how well our body is functioning. We all know people in their 70s who look like they're in their 50s, and we all know people in their 50s who look like they're in their 70s, right? There's a lot of that difference in biology despite chronological age, and we call that phenotypic variation. And so really, if we're wanting to measure this biological aging process in a better way, we need better markers of this process. And forever, these have been, this search for these biological age markers has always continued to be improved. And so, even in the 1920s, people were defining biological age as the number of pack per years you smoked plus your chronological age, really crude measurements. But as we've gone along, we've been able to really improve these markers. And so we're starting to get more resolution. We're getting in things that you might be familiar with, obviously, like hormonal changes, where we see decreases in testosterone, sex hormones, and vitamin D, and IGF-1, and those other growth hormones. We see increased inflammatory markers, and we see reduced, stem cells. We see decreased functional changes like reduced grip strength, bone mineral density, walking speed, and we see those signs of frailty. And so the resolution for these markers is getting better and better and better. in the case of even in the last couple of years, how we define aging is continuing to be expanded, which is really just to say that aging is an extremely complex process. Aging itself is really defined as the progressive loss of function as we age. And that progressive loss of function can manifest in a lot of ways. On the left, you can see the hallmarks of aging that were really popularized in 2019 and 2020. And now, even in 2023, we already have the addition of 5 additional hallmarks of aging. And so, I think that this is a very complex topic, but we also want to talk about the ways that we might quantify this aging process. And so really, the American Federation of Aging Research really put out these 4 criteria for measuring the biological aging process. And so it must be able to predict the rate of aging or tell where someone is along their lifespan. And it must be better to predict that than chronological age. It also must monitor a basic underlying process that underlies aging and be separate from disease. So we don't want to measure disease. We want to measure aging itself and separate those two. And that can be very hard sometimes. It must be able to be tested repeatedly, and it also must be able to work and be similar across animal species so that we can do this testing in lab animals before validating in humans. And so the advent of AI and computer learning has made this type of diagnostic much, much easier, as I've already talked about. And really, this multi-omic approach is now, I would say, how most scientists in the field are approaching these biomarkers by looking at each of these different levels. And this really overcomes the problem we talked about earlier, where genetics was only just one piece of this much, much larger puzzle. Genomics obviously give us the baseline of who we are, but what genes are turned on and turned off. The epigenomics is the next step there. What then actually gets transcribed into mRNA is transcriptomics. What mRNA makes in terms of proteins and peptides, they are considered these proteomics. And then the metabolites of these processes are called metabolomics. And ultimately, this all integrates into the phenotype, what actually happens to the patient. So for instance, in aging, are they frail? Do they have a worse immune system? Are they able to, have a VO2 max or respiratory function that is sufficient with the aging process? And so those are all the things we want to add to a bigger picture. And this multi-omic and computer learning approach has definitely improved that. And so I always like to sort of compare these platforms. And if anyone would like to see more of this, I just recently did a presentation last Thursday comparing each of these different platforms and which ones were the best measures of biological age. And there are a lot of different ways that we would assess that. But the one I think that is definitively accepted as the most predictive, the most accurate, and by far the most validated is DNA methylation analysis. So taking those same methylation marks we see on your DNA and interpreting it to predict your biological age. And these are extremely predictive. They generally beat any of these other biomarkers, and I can always go into that, but they've been very well validated. And we know that they're validated because we can take those same measurements in cohorts like the Framingham Heart Study, which have samples from over 60 years ago. And we can take these analyses and see how predictive they are of outcomes. Because at the end of the day, why are we measuring age? And the idea is that it's the biggest risk factor for all chronic disease and death. But we also want to make sure that we know it's predicting those outcomes well. And that's what we can validate in these really large cohort. We know that those people who are at accelerated aging with these biological age platforms tend to have worse outcomes and worse disease. And so with all that being said, we know that epigenetic age is your biggest risk factor for chronic disease and death. We also know that epigenetic age is definitively the best way to measure it. And it's also correlated to quality of life related metrics, which we'll go to in later. So generally, accelerated aging equals shorter lifespan and health span, and decelerated aging, being younger than your biological age, younger than your chronological age, makes sure that we know that you have a longer lifespan and health span. And we also know that aging starts the moment that we're born, so there's not an age which is too early. And so the question is, why wouldn't everyone try and measure and manage their major risk factor for all disease, especially if they don't have other concerns? Because we know that this is the biggest risk factor for developing other concerns. So let's be preventative about this, and let's measure this. And so with that being said, how do we dive into this and how do we analyze this? And so these clocks, these methylation clocks, have had a wide history. They really started in 2013. with Dr. Steve Horvath from UCLA, who created a pan-tissue clock, which worked in all different types of cells, and at first wasn't necessarily going to be a medical diagnostic. It was really at first thought to be applied to things like forensic crime scene investigations, to see how old someone was if they left their DNA at a crime scene, or to date refugees, to see if they were adults or minors and then therefore eligible for asylum. And this actually happened in Europe with the Syrian refugee crisis. And so those are what we call those first generation clocks, and they were trained to predict the chronological age of a patient. The problem with that is that the better that those clocks got to predicting chronological age, the less they were representing the biology of aging. And that's really what we want to measure. And so these second generation clocks led to, I would say, being trained to predict not chronological age, but aging phenotypes, things like sarcopenia, things like, mental cognitive dysfunction, things like telomere length or other blood-based biomarkers that we know change with age, like some of those hormones, like those sex hormones, for instance. And those clocks got much better. And the way that we know they got much better was because that they essentially predicted outcomes better. So, and we'll go into this a little bit more, but if you were accelerated aging on those platforms, you increased your risk even above those first tests in terms of your relative risk. And then lastly, and what we're going to be talking about the majority of today is this third generation clock, or the rate of aging clock, as we call it. And in our opinion, this is definitively the best clock which has ever been published. It has the highest prediction to all of these outcomes. And it was created really uniquely because it was trained on a really interesting cohort, which was a longitudinal cohort. And so to explain a little bit more about how this was created, you can see here all of the different biomarkers that were tested in this population, but it actually tested them longitudinally. So instead of looking at a lot of different patients over, very different points in their lives, this clock was created by the same patients. And so this Dunedin cohort actually started when these patients were just born. So it started in 1972, whenever these patients were just being born in New Zealand. And the town that this was happened in is called Dunedin, New Zealand. And so this is how it gets its name. And what they wanted to do is track aging over the course of everyone's lifespan. So they had 1,037 children, and they tracked them as they were aging. And in 2021, we actually did their 45-year age follow-up. And so actually right now in New Zealand, Terry Moffat, the professor from Duke University who helped create this, is actually doing their 51-year age follow-up. So this will continue to be tracked over time to provide the best resolution of this aging process across cohorts. And this is actually how we created this pace of aging algorithm. And so whenever we do your testing, that is what we put out. We tell you here your pace of aging, or how fast are you aging in a biological year per year basis. So for instance, this person is aging at a rate of 0.88 biological years per year. And you can see that in this population level graph, this is everyone who's tested on our platform. And so you can see that as people get older, their rates of aging tend to increase. And so this is the main factor we want to decrease. We want to see these scores as low as possible. And we want to talk about how we can implement this in clinical practice to make sure that we're doing the right interventions, finding out what is working for individuals to drive this even lower. And when we do drive it lower, we can see massive impacts on lifespan. So here is where we have validated this in the Frames Heart study. And so here you can see people who are slow agers. Those are people who would be one standard deviation below that average midline you saw earlier. We see average agers who are that second line. And then at the very bottom, we see those people who are fast agers. And here you can look at how often these people died in this cohort over the course of 15 years. And you can see that those people who were only averaging a slow pace of aging only died at a 6% rate over the course of 15 years, while those people who were averaging fast aging were dying essentially at a 64% rate over the course of 15 years. And so this makes a major difference in terms of lifespan. And this is exactly why we want to try and change this marker. In addition to that, we know that this is by far the most predictive clock. If you compare this to other clocks, we can see exactly how much more predictive it is. So for instance, that Horvath clock that I mentioned that really started this, with one standard deviation increase in that clock, you would only get a 2% increased risk in mortality, versus one standard deviation increase in the Dunedin pace clock, you would get a 64% increased risk in mortality. So this is a very, very predictive clock, and it's why it is the best marker for biological aging. It is definitively more predictive than things like telomeres, and it is the best measure of aging, at least at this moment. And in addition to that, it's not just correlated to things like mortality and cardiovascular disease and stroke. It's also correlated to all of these activities of daily living, as we would call them. So you can see some of those activity of daily living on the right, where you can judge by deficiencies in some of these things, like dressing, bathing, sitting for long periods, lifting, over 10 pounds, being able to walk a mile. All of these things are highly correlated. So it's not just about your risk of disease, it's also about all of these quality of life metrics. And this is why we want to decrease it. A lower Dunedin pace reduces your risk of all of these negative outcomes. And just to put that in even more context, even if you're slightly above the rate of aging of 1 biological year per year, so you're even at 1.1, for instance, for your pace of aging, you would increase your risk of death over the next 7 years by 56%, and you'd increase your risk of a chronic disease diagnosis by 54%. So these can make major, major risk changes. And again, as we talked about earlier, those people who are considered fast agers were 65% more likely to die in our cohorts than those who are at normal or slow aging. So this is the best marker that you can do, especially if you're healthy, to improve all of your outcomes. I also want to talk about what happened when we followed up with these patients at the age of 45. When we followed up with these patients, we actually were able to plot their pace of aging versus their performance on several different tests. And as you can see here, the people who were at faster rates of aging via this diagnostic had worse performance on balance testing. In addition to that, we know that they had worse muscle mass and worse grip strength. So they generally had, just more markers of frailty. In addition to that, we know that they had significantly more cognitive decline. And actually, those people who were aging at a rate of 2 were up to 15 IQ points lower than those people who were aging at a rate of 1. We also see this, and maybe the reason for some of these IQ changes on the brain. If we look at brain MRIs, we see that those people with faster rates of aging had significantly worse cortical thickness and surface area of the brain, which can, again, manifest in all of those different changes. And also, what everyone likes to see, what everyone and definitely patients respond to, is seeing this visually as it relates to facial aging. So these are actually composite images of real people in this cohort, where we sort of have morphed all of their faces together. What you can see on the left are those 10 slowest aging members of the cohort. And comparatively, on the right, you can see those 10 fastest aging members of the cohort. And so you can see that they look to be 20 or 30 years apart. And that is probably because biologically, at least, they are. Some people have been aging at a rate of 0.6 biological years per year, while other people have been aging at a rate of maybe 1.4 biological years per year. And so over the course of 45 years of life, that can add up not to all of these phenotypes. And so we always use this and tell people, definitely keep doing your Botox, keep doing all the aesthetic things that you're doing to fix these symptoms, but you should also be treating the underlying cause of why this is happening in the first place, which is the aging process itself. And so by fixing and treating this aging process and monitoring it, you can be sure that your patients are going to have less of these outcomes. So they're going to have better facial aging. They're going to have better gait speed. They're going to have better grip strength and motor coordination. They're going to have better perceptual reasoning and working memory. And they're even going to look better as it relates to facial aging. And so this is, why we're treating this marker. Even in healthy patients, this marker is the best predictor of negative outcomes. And so if you've got healthy patients, this is what you want to be testing. Even if you've got diseased patients, obviously treat the disease first. And when you treat the disease, you'll probably also see that you improve their biological aging rates. Because these processes are connected. If you have a disease, if you have an abnormal biological function, it will probably make you age faster. Vice versa, if you have accelerated aging, you're probably at more risk for disease. And I should also mention that this has been validated to be probably the best marker. So here you can see all of the different age clocks that are out there. And the Dunedin pace outperforms all of them in things like, traditional comparison to traditional measurements like phenotypic age advancement, the KDM biological age advancement, homeostatic regulation. And even though it's not the best in self-rated health, it is definitely there at the top. So it has correlations to all of these different factors. And so one other thing I want to talk about is why we made this available, particularly as a TruAgePACE test. So if anyone's familiar with our testing, I'll go into the different options that we have, but we really wanted to make this test the priority and provide it at a lower price point. And one of the reasons is because of this right here. And this is from a table from a publication in 2020 from Jamie Justice, who does a lot of work with biomarkers and FDA-approved biomarkers. And Jamie was asking the question of, are these biological clocks ready be for implementation into clinical practice and clinical trials, especially FDA-approved clinical trials. And the overall summary in 2020 was no, it is not. And the reason was that these are not no data has been shown that these are responsive to interventions we already know beneficially affect biology. So, for instance, things like caloric restriction, which has been validated, in multiple animal species, and in definitely in humans as well. And so, in 2020, this had not occurred, but that has occurred now. And so, we actually did study the calorie study, which was basically an 11% caloric restriction study in a couple thousand patients, and it looked at the caloric restriction group aging rate versus those who were not caloric restricted. And what we saw was that over the course of 2 years, those who were doing caloric restriction definitively reduced their rates of aging, while those people who were not doing caloric restriction increased their rate of aging. And so we have proven that now. We do know that these things are responsive to interventions that beneficially affect biology. But beyond that, we also know that not all clocks did that well. And in the case of actually those first generation clocks, they didn't respond to that. They actually went up with caloric restriction, which didn't match any of the other clinical data. And so this is why we wanted to make the TruAgePACE, or the TruAgePACE, as we call it, available at a lower price point, because this is the best algorithm to measure interventional change. And that is really the reason that we're doing it, right? Especially in a clinical practice, so that you can find out what is working for your patients to reduce their biological aging process, and proving to them that you're reversing all of their risk for chronic disease, death, facial aging, memory by reversing this marker. And so this TruAgePACE is definitively the one that has been the most validated for interventional treatment. And that is really why we want to use it. And this is just another good slide to show that it's also the most predictive at separating cognitively normal, mild cognitive impairment, and dementia. It is the best clock overall. And this also shows that it is the most accurate clock overall. So we have less than a 3% variance if we tested the exact same sample, which means that this can be used in really quick intervals. You can even use it as often as every 3 months to see change. So this means that, for instance, you might start a patient on metformin. You might have one patient who responds and the rate of aging goes down. Whereas for other patients, you might see that the rate of aging goes up. And so you can really start to see what is actually working for this patient. And so this is by far the most accurate and the most precise clock. And it is really, really good for personalized medicine. Exactly. This is exactly what I mentioned with that metformin, where we can actually use this tool to find out what is working on an individual basis. And everything can affect this. Everything from diet, lifestyle, nutrition, sleep, medications, even just the amount of exercise can affect this. And so it is a really good tool to provide feedback for all the things that you are doing. I know that I'm seeing some questions right now about some of the comparison to other age biomarkers. And so I will definitely go back to that probably at the end of the presentation. I'll compare it to things like telomeres. I'll compare it to things, like glycan age measurements. And we'll definitely go through that. I also see a question from Katie that says, do you know if this is the same test that Kara Fitzgerald is using to detect biological age? And the answer is yes. We do work with Dr. Fitzgerald in her program. And this is definitely the test that she is using. And then I also see a couple other questions about if a patient has extremely high markers of inflammation on their blood work, like homocysteine, CRP, would those not necessarily reflect in their biological true age? And how quickly, if you saw changes in that, would you expect true age to be changed? And so there is a definitive link between these biomarkers and inflammation. It was actually even trained on inflammatory markers like CRP, for instance. And so with that being said, they definitely correlate. And if you were to improve inflammation, you would certainly expect to see improvements in biological age, but that process is going to be a different timing for anyone. Some people might see changes in as quickly as 3 weeks. Other people might see changes over the course of 6 months. I think it really depends on the individual patient circumstances. But we do know that if you reduce those markers of inflammation, you will see improvements in the biological aging rate. I can also mention that beyond that, you will also start to, I would say, see some reports on our platform that actually will tell you levels of inflammatory markers. So you'll be able to we'll use methylation to predict things like CRP, IL-6, TNF alpha. And so those are actually some of the next reports that are coming out. And although we won't have time to go through all of the reports on the platform today, our platform does do a lot more than just these markers. And with that being said, this gives a little bit of an outline of the different pricing, as well as the different reports that are on the platform. So with the TruAgePACE, this is that lower cost pricing and platform to make sure that it's more accessible to people with the best algorithm that we have, which is that Dunedin-PACE algorithm that we developed with Duke and Columbia that we've been really focusing on today. But in addition to that, you also get telomeres. And so I'm going to go into telomeres just really, really briefly. These are the two reports, but I want to talk about DNA methylation-based estimation of telomere length versus regular telomere length. So usually in these presentations, I would show a comparison of how predictive telomere length is versus methylation. And really the answer is telomere length has a lot of studies, tens of thousands of studies, but really none of them are able to predict outcomes. Knowing that you have short telomere length doesn't really tell you what to do about it. And so in the case of even this, our measurement of DNA telomere length has double the correlation to age of regular telomere length. So it's definitively more correlated to age. In addition to that, our measurements of telomere length are able to outperform regular telomere length testing in terms of predicting time until death, time to coronary heart disease, time to congestive heart failure. And as a result, we think that our telomere marker is definitively better. But with that being said, we really only provide telomere length because it is something that people are very familiar with. In almost all cases, and it's not even really close, the ability for methylation algorithms like the Dunedin-PACE to outpredict telomere length is substantial. We're talking, 100x better resolution of predicting outcomes. And I'll get into that a little bit more with some of the slides I had earlier when we compare those platforms, and try and get to that as well at the end. So with all that being said, I know we're running out of time, and I definitely want to spend time on answering some questions. And so, what we really want to talk about today is, I think that hopefully by now we've established that this is one of the best measurements, if not the best measurement to measure biological age. And I'll compare those other platforms so you can know that for certain. I definitely believe that. But with that being said, hopefully you understand the importance of measuring age. I think everyone knows biological age is the number one risk, and that methylation is the best way to do that. We also already have shown you that this particular measurement, the TruAgePACE and the Dunedin-PACE is the best performing methylation algorithm of any that have been published. We know how it affects outcomes. We know how it affects, health span and lifespan. And so let's figure out how we can actually get this into patients' hands and within your hands, so you can go ahead and measure and improve this process for your patients. And so what I like to do is to talk about sort of two different options. One is the a la carte option, and the other one is the package and program option. And so the a la carte option is just offering this and letting your patients know that it's available, especially if you're not treating longevity as the main, I would say, output of your practice. This can be by far the best option. But what I want to go into a little bit more is some of these packages and programs. These are the people who are definitively the most successful with our testing. The people who are seeing the biggest age reductions are the people who are offering this as a package. So they're going to the patients and offering, these age rejuvenation protocols, these longevity treatment protocols as a package. And I just want to show one clinical example that I think has been really, really powerful. And so this clinic example was, one of our first clinics who onboarded, and they really wanted to do this particular protocol, one TruAge Complete, which is our larger testing upon their initial program. And they sold these to patients in 6-month packages. And so they had one complete test, one TruAgePACE on the follow-up, and then they implemented a program for nutritional fitness and lifestyle recommendations, as well as really 3 prescription medications, and a whole host of nutritional support, which has been backed up by some of these interventional trials that have happened with epigenetic age. And so this is what they did. This is sort of the monetization. They did create a private label supplement for their brand, but these are sort of the cost associated over the course of 6 months. They were doing each one of these supplements as a private label. So they were ordering 6 bottles, so 1 bottle per month. Then they were doing the TruAge Complete, the TruAgePACE, and they were selling these in 6-month protocols. And so this was sort of the cost of everything that they did altogether. You can see those strikeouts because, again, they did reduce the individual costs, but you can build your own longevity program. You can choose which supplements to include. You can choose what type of testing you want to do. Maybe you don't want to do the complete collection at all. You only want to do the PACE. And then beyond that, they had some of the prescription costs. So they saw things like, they added things like Rapamune, low-dose lithium, and metformin, and negotiated some pharmacy totals, which made this very affordable for their patients. And so together with the, sort of the prescriptions, their total cost of good was only $250 or $4 over this course of time. And what they did is the total cost for the program was set right around $254 per month, and they were charging patients right around $450 a month. And they had 2,000 patients that they were doing. It was a relatively large clinic, and they enrolled 10%. And over the course of their first 6 months, they were able to generate over $235,000 in revenue for their practice. And so, not only I think scientifically is this supported as the best intervention you can do preventatively, trying to treat this number one risk factor for all disease, but there's also ways to make it approachable and affordable for all of your patients in these longevity package formats. And so if anyone has questions, I'm always happy to answer a little bit more of those. These are some of the other things that I would say are packages and programs that our physicians are using are really, really working. If you have any questions on these, we have some great providers who have shared their experience on the platform and how they've incorporated this into their practice. And we're always happy to share those as well. And so I definitely would love to open it up for questions. I know that one of the first things I wanted to do was also take it back to the comparison of omic biomarkers, because there's one question I didn't answer, which is I already talked about the comparison for telomeres, but I wanted to also talk about the comparison to glycans. And I absolutely love glycans as a biomarker. I think glycans are going to be involved in predictions for several disease processes. And really, as I mentioned already, aging is complex, and really the more you can sort of consolidate as a composite biomarker, the better. But in the case of things like glycan age, there are a couple issues with this. One is that their correlation to age is definitively lower than that of some of these other platforms, and really there's no large-scale meta-analysis to disease outcomes. And beyond that, their initial training data size was only in right around 2,000 patients. And so those all, I would say, are things that methylation and other omics like the proteomics and even metabolomics would generally outperform. Beyond that, I think that there's some other data about glycans being maybe too modifiable. So for instance, we know that we've seen in even some of our patients that their glycan age can drop by 20 or 30 years with the simple addition of estrogen, which might be great if you want to prove to your patients you're reversing their age, but we also know that estrogen doesn't necessarily increase your lifespan by 20 or 30 years. And so it might be too modifiable by certain measurements. And so I think glycans is definitively going to be a biomarker of the future, just like methylation. But right now, I would say that, and again, I'm biased, so take this for what it's worth, but that methylation still outperforms glycans and really any of these other markers at the moment for really capturing the total biological aging process. And so with that being said, I'd love to go and answer some of these other questions. I think I hopefully answered that telomere length question. Again, the correlation is over double that of even our predictive telomere length. But I can even share a 2017 article that was published as a review of biological age predictors, which summed it up better than I could, which as a direct quote said, briefly, telomere lengths have been extensively validated as a biomarker for age, but have low predictive utility. And so hopefully that summarizes it. Hopefully I went to the glycan age markers as well. Again, not nearly as correlated, don't have large scale data to prove how associated they are to aging outcomes, but definitively is going to be a great biomarker there in the future. I already think I talked about the relationship to methylation, and we will be adding those on our report. I think that, one of the other things that I see is a question about MTHFR status. And this is a really good question. So we do know that MTHFR status is slightly correlated to your methylation age. However, only women with an MTHFR 677cc variant can actually improve that biological age with the supplementation of methyl cofactors. There is the thought that a man with a MTHFR 677TT variant could also do that. But the study didn't find any correlation there in men, only in women with who were taking folic acid or B vitamins, and they did see an improvement. So if you have an MTHFR variant, especially if you're a woman and have an MTHFR with 677cc variant, then doing a methylation cofactor might reduce your biological age. And if it does, it can do it very, very quickly, even just within a few weeks with some of our testing. And so I also see a question about how unique or different is Clockwise compared to TruAgePACE. We actually are doing all the testing in our lab for Clockwise. We love the Clockwise organization. They're definitely doing a little bit more fertility related things and things like environmental exposures, which impacts some of the fertility a little bit more. Your ovaries are really the first system to drastically biological age. I think that Clockwise is definitely shares our same mission and provides a few different reports than we do, but we do all their testing here in our lab, and we love that organization. I also see some questions about how I can compare, sort of other methylation-based tests. And I do have a slide for this, but simply put, we are the only group out there that has a published algorithm. And the reason that this is important is I always compare unpublished algorithms to going to a fortune teller. You can choose to believe them, but how do you know it actually works or is associated with outcomes? And in that case, you really want to make sure that the data is validated, published, and peer reviewed. Beyond that, I will also say we're the only algorithm out there that is doing any second or third generation algorithms. And again, remember, the reason that this is important is that those first generation algorithms don't always respond well to intervention. So for instance, these first clocks that were trained to predict chronological age went up with caloric restriction, which we know just is not true. And whenever we've done a lot of these chronologically trained algorithms, but we know that they don't perform nearly as well as things that are second generation, like the Dunedin pace, for instance. And so this is why we always tell people that you're going to prioritize the Dunedin pace. And people get frustrated with those first generation clocks because you can test, you can do everything the right way, and then it will go up. And that's because it's not trained specifically to the biological process. It's not giving you the best information. So as we're compared to other platforms, we are the only, I would say, platform that has a second or third generation clock. We are the only platform that has published algorithms. And beyond that, we also are the only platform that has our own lab and does all of our own testing, all of our own quality assurance and bioinformatics. And so we've also got probably the most offering in terms of reporting. So we do a lot of other reporting as well. And really starting in March, we'll have over 10 new reports, even to what we're doing now. We'll have things like biological aging of each organ system. We'll actually be able to tell you how your kidneys versus your liver versus your brain are aging, which might give you a little bit of resolution into sort of this aging process. And so, I think that we're hopefully pushing the way, and we've even got these multi-omic, proteomic, metabolomic clocks coming out as well. And so I think that hopefully I've answered everything. And Adrian, I know that I don't know if we should continue here, but I think I do see one more question, which is about some of those interventions. And are there any substances that would significantly or falsely disrupt results in either way? And so to sort of talk about that, there are a lot of interventions which have been studied to improve this platform. Obviously, we know caloric restriction is a great one. We also know things like rapamycin have looked very, very good in our data sets. But in terms of getting maybe a false value, we do know that things like periods of stress, like surgeries or even pregnancy, can artificially raise these markers over a short amount of time. But it's very, very hard to change these results by any particular instance. We do segment these from immune cell components, so we actually know what types of immune cells you have and at what percentage, and that's also used as a control factor. So it's very hard to, I would say, see a lot of discrepancies or any inaccurate results. And so if anyone has any more questions, we're always happy to reach out to me at Ryan@TruDiagnostic, and we're happy to go through any of those questions, provide some of the comparisons between the other platforms. But I hope that's a good start, and appreciate your all's time today.
Ryan, that was fantastic. One question I do have for you, though, if folks are interested in learning more, what's the best way that they can get in contact with the TruDiagnostic team?
Yeah, the best thing to do is to email us directly. You can email me at Ryan@TruDiagnostic.com, or you can always go to support@TruDiagnostic.com, and we'll get back to you very, very quickly.
So, folks, I know that we had some amazing questions coming in, and Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to do that. before we jump off and transition into showing you exactly how to order this test, do you have any final questions or final thoughts for the people?
Well, I think that, one of the things is if you have any questions, certainly feel free to reach out to us, but be excited about the way that we're quantifying this aging process. It is, more exciting than ever. And I would say even investment in this longevity space is different. So hopefully you can apply it to your practice. If you have any questions, certainly let me know. But I hope you enjoyed the topic today, and certainly keep an ear to the ground with everything methylation related.
I love it. Ryan, I appreciate you so much. We're getting a ton of great feedback already. I know these take time, so thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for the TruDiagnostic team. So what we're going to transition to real quick, everybody, is showing you exactly how to order this test directly on Rupa Health. Ryan, you're welcome to stay in or you can hop off, but I'm going to go ahead and share the screen at this point, and we can just dive right in. So for those of you who joined late or don't know who I am, my name is Adrian Martinez, and I am the head of practitioner partnerships here at Rupa Health. Really what that means is that my role here is to ensure that you're set up for success when you're looking to place orders from one of our partners like TruDiagnostic. So what I'm going to show you exactly how to order this test. So for those of you who don't know what Rupa is a functional medicine lab platform. We are designed with a goal in mind of making life easier when it comes to ordering lab testing. Right now, there are a ton of pain points when it comes to lab testing, everything from the practitioner side of having multiple different logins for all your different labs to the patient side, one being able to afford these tests, all the support that comes along with it, all the questions, if there's a specimen issue, so on and so forth. And so we're designed to alleviate all those by bringing one central hub where you can order from 30 plus labs, including TruDiagnostic, all in one place without having to go to each separate portal to do so. To show you just how easy that is, to start an order on Rupa Health, all you need is the patient's first name, last name, and email address. From there, it brings you right into this order screen here, where you can do things like creating custom bundles. You can create a favorites list made up of individual tests that you're commonly ordering. So if I do want to order that TruAgePACE that Ryan was speaking about earlier, I can go ahead and just click that, add that into my cart. And then from there, I just go ahead and press send a patient, and then that's it. That's how I can order from TruDiagnostic within a matter of seconds. Normally, I'd have to have the whole patient's file up on hand. I'd have to go and log into their portal, place this order, so on and so forth. But not only can I order the TruAgePACE, but let's say maybe I want to order a Dutch test, maybe I want to order a GI map. We have all these at your fingertips at the wholesale practitioner price. So that we offer the same price that you get having an account directly with the labs here at Rupa Health. Beyond that, you go ahead and press send a patient. Now, let me show you a little bit how our pricing works. The cost to order from Rupa is a 7% processing and ordering fee, okay? And that's paid for by whoever pays for the tests. So if you're having us manage the billing directly with the patients, then the patients will be the one paying the 7%. In that scenario, Rupa is completely free for you. There's no cost to sign up for Rupa. There's no monthly cost. There's no subscription fee. There's no minimum spend, anything like that. All you're doing is this 7% processing and ordering fee, which again, if you're having us bill your patient for that cost, then it will be completely free for you to use. You can add notes for the patient. You can add notes to us, as well as you can add ICD-10 codes. So if you do want to go ahead and have us automatically create a super bill for your patients so they can submit that to their insurance for reimbursement, potential reimbursement, then we can go ahead and do that for you. Again, normally you would have to be working with your patient to create that super bill. We're going to automate that process for you. And again, we're free to use, right? That 7% is the only cost to use Rupa. From there, you just go ahead and press send a patient. What happens then is that we take care of the patient experience. So another really important component of Rupa Health is the fact that we will manage the patient experience end to end. So as soon as you press send on your order, your patient will receive a notification from us letting them know that the practitioner has ordered the tests. We will ship the kits out within 24 hours. One thing to note is that we only operate within the US. I know that Ryan mentioned that TruDiagnostic can operate international. You would just simply work with TruDiagnostic directly in that circumstance. From there, we will send over instructions and FAQs to your patients. We'll walk the patient through any questions that they have, any specimen issues that arise, any support, as well as we can even help coordinate phlebotomies as well. Again, all these things would traditionally fall on your shoulders. And then from there, we'll follow up with the patient, and then you're notified as the results come in. So this is what that all looks like. As I mentioned, we can reach out to the patient and we know, hey, these practitioners that have ordered the test for you. We'll introduce who we are. And a really important aspect to Rupa Health is the fact that we offer multiple different payment solutions. We understand that these tests can be very expensive and costs can be oftentimes prohibitive. And so with that, we offer not only credit or debit to pay for it, but we can also accept HSA, we can accept FSA, and additionally, we can create a 3-month interest-free payment plan with your patient to pay for the cost of these tests. From there, we'll reach out to the patient, and then we will ship the kits to your patient along with instructions and FAQs. As I mentioned, we'll walk your patient through the entire support and test taking process. Just to reiterate, these would be things that fall under your shoulders, and understanding that we work with practitioners and practitioners in the functional medicine space. tend to understand that patients can be a little bit needy. And so by offloading all the patient support work off your shoulders onto ours, we're potentially saving you and your team a lot of headache and a lot of hours. That is, a necessary component to these tests. Additionally, we can help coordinate that phlebotomy. So if you are doing a test that requires a blood draw, we can either send over the patient your recommendation. So if you do have a preferred phlebotomist location, we can go ahead and send that to your patient. Otherwise, we will send over the options based on the lab that they're working with. But if the patient does want other options, maybe they don't like the phlebotomy options that were sent their way, they can reach out to our team and we will search by zip code to send over any viable options within their area. And finally, you're alerted as the results come in. So once the results are in, you just hop right back into your main dashboard here. You're able to view all of your results in one place. So again, another huge benefit to having Rupa Health is you get everything in one place. You don't have to go to 5 different portals to see all of your results. You have it all under one roof. You can download the results. You can send the results to your patients. You can also schedule a clinical consultation. So if you do want some assistance interpreting those results, you can go ahead and schedule time with the lab that you're working with one of their clinicians. So you're not losing any of those features that you would be getting if you were to be working directly with the lab by working through Rupa Health. Additionally, you can see when the sample arrived at the lab and when you can expect those results to come in. So all clear forms of communication. Now, a couple of other amazing features of Rupa is not only do we have it all under one roof for you as a practitioner, but if you are a practitioner whose license or certifications might limit your ability to order certain testings, let's say maybe you're a nutritionist in California and can't order certain tests just due to limitations, we actually offer a program called Physician Services. And what that does is it allows you to work with a licensed physician who would order tests on your behalf. So it really opens up the options that you have to be able to work with patients. Beyond that, another example would be if you're working in telehealth. Maybe you are a physician in Florida, but you want to work with patients in maybe Georgia and you're not licensed there. Through the Physician Services program, that will allow you to work with those patients. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. Now, the last thing I want to call out here is Rupa University. So beyond just somewhere where you can come and order all your tests, we want to offer a place where you can come and learn as well. So that's why we do these live classes that you're in right now, right? We host these live classes on a weekly basis with our lab partners or representatives within the functional medicine community to be able to come and share their knowledge with you regarding testing and important testing, right? So you're able to join these, and as you saw today, learn about the tests that are offered here on Rupa Health, the science behind them, the how to implement them in your clinical practice, and have your questions answered by the specialists within the field. So come to Rupa, get access to not only all your tests in one place, but a ton of amazing education. And you can see just the content that we have created here, not only just, within the live classes, but we also offer paid options. We offer a boot camp. So we have an upcoming boot camp with the GI map coming up here in, I believe, February. So if you are interested in signing up for this one, February 20th, this is a 6-week deep dive into understanding the GI map test through DSL. This is more of a in-depth learning experience. It's the only other paid option that we have here at Rupa Health, but it's an opportunity for you to jump in and learn. There's no CE with it, of course, because we are doing it directly with the GI map and diagnostic solutions, but you're not going to learn the tests from a more experienced person than the people directly with DSL. But with that, y'all, again, my name is Adrian Martinez. It's been a pleasure. If you have any questions, I can stick around for a few minutes. More than happy to kind of answer those. But let me jump right in, and I'm going to share my contact information. So if you do have any questions, you know where to reach me. But this is my contact information here. So let's jump right into some of these questions. Kathy, I'll reach out to you. Thank you. Let's see. Adrian, are there any legalities and those non-medically licensed practitioners or approved physician services need to read up on or charge a lab interpretation fee? Cool. So the question here is, what legalities are there for non-medically licensed practitioners to be able to use physician services? So in terms of legalities, there are some very specific details that need to be covered with the physician services. So physician services, just to recap, is the program that we offer here at Rupa that allows you as a practitioner to partner with a licensed physician who will order certain tests on your behalf. It's not something that we offer to all practitioners. You do have to apply for it and be approved. That said, due to the fact that the licensed practitioner, or the physician, is the one placing the orders, the liability isn't necessarily on you as a practitioner. who's the one placing the order through Rupa Health. And what we'll do with that is we actually go ahead and send the results directly to the patient. So that's something that you do need to be aware of, is the patient will automatically receive a copy of their results. And in terms of if you're able to charge an interpretation fee, yes, you can charge an interpretation fee as long as you're offering that interpretation fee to the patient, or interpretation to the patient, excuse me. So you can still go ahead and schedule, or excuse me, add that interpretation fee along with the order through physician services. But one of the limitations to physician services is that you don't get access to the scheduling a clinical consultation, right? So I showed that earlier, where you can generally schedule a clinical consultation with the lab through physician services. Since a licensed physician is ordering the tests on your behalf for your patient, your name isn't going to be on the requisition form, and thus you're not able to schedule a clinical consultation with the lab. I hope that helps. Do we link with EHR systems? We do. Gaja, thanks for asking. So we do work with a handful of EHR systems. The top ones that are coming to mind is we work with Optimantra, we work with Elation, we work with Practice Better, we work with ODX, and a handful of others. But you can get that full list if you Google EHR Rupa Health. We can get that as well. To sign up for physician services, all you'll do is you can actually go to Rupa Health. Again, it's a free account to sign up for. So all you're doing is going to rupahealth.com, creating an account, and throughout that sign up process, which takes under 3 minutes, you can go ahead and select that you want to sign up for physician services, and it will go ahead and sign you up, or rather have you apply. As a licensed practitioner, I would like more information on working with patients in other states. Absolutely. Kathy, I'm going to go ahead and give you a call. I'll shoot you an email. I don't think I have your phone number handy, but I will go ahead and give you a call as soon as possible. I'll shoot you an email. But I don't see any other questions in the chat. Again, my name is Adrian Martinez. If you are interested, please reach out. More than happy to do a more customized demonstration of the platform to walk you through everything to see if it makes sense for you. That's what it's all about, right? Rupa Health is intended to be a tool to help make your life easier. And that's exactly what we do here. Yes, there is a recording, and we'll go ahead and send it out within the coming days once we have the opportunity to do some edits to it. But Kathy, taking your number. I got you. Perfect. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. I want to, again, give one more shout out to, Ryan and the team over at TruDiagnostic. But if you are interested in joining these in the future, I'd love to see you. We have some amazing ones coming up in 2023. Take care, everyone.